Hey. So I'm Marilyn. I'm a product manager at Quiqup. Just to get a bit of background about me and what I'm doing and what Quiqup is. I've been doing product management for about 4 years now, in various different roles. So I've been at Quiqup for about 18 months. They're a last mile delivery service. Prior to that, I was consulting a little bit for some seed stage startups. Worked at TripTease, which is another kind of hyper growth startup in the travel space, and then kind of going backwards, got into product through sort of digital marketing and e-commerce management at a music company here in London. How to build your product team for success. So just context about why I wanted to present on this and why it's important to me. The product manager abyss. So my role, as I've experienced it, is this long list of things and more. I need to understand the business, understand the technology, be able to have empathy with customers, converse with them, stay agile, write tickets. The list goes on. It's very long, and I could never sleep if I wanted to and just keep working. I've also, interestingly, I'll go through this, but I've been trying to look for research around exactly what is a product manager. It's a little bit of a divergence, but it's interesting because in different roles I've had, the expectations of what I do have actually been pretty varied. And there's not a lot of research out there, especially in terms of training people to lead and become sort of more skilled in product, apart from product school, of course, plug. But I did find a really interesting article that came out recently by McKinsey about product management, and they had this kind of nice 5 core capabilities that are required for product managers. And you can go in and read it yourself, but it's essentially kind of these 5 really big areas, right? So business acumen, market orientation, soft skills, technical skills, and customer experience. And then they added some stuff around the side of it as well to make it, even more kind of heavy loaded. So anyway, we have a lot to do. There's no lying about that. So that's where, to me, the value of a good team really comes in. So some of the reasons for the value of a good team: one is you just can't do everything. You have to accept it. I think my experience with product is that I got into it because I'm kind of nosy and I like to know what's going on. I like to understand the detail and I like to know the big picture, but I can't do everything, and I certainly can't code, so that doesn't help. And the second reason is that you're spending a lot of time with your team. This is also stolen from McKinsey. But so they actually went around and broke down the percentage of time spent by product managers. The first one is defining product. The second one is actually collaborating with technical and design functions. And then it's followed by product requirements. So it's actually sandwiched in between the product things. It's super, super important. And then third, this is where it gets kind of interesting, of this collective IQ versus individual IQ. So again, I was trying to do my research on this and trying to do it because, take a short side note, is that the team that I work with now at Quiqup has been one where we've really managed to build a team that hums together. And the team is, the one I work in is 8 developers, 1 product designer, and begging a data analyst for some data every now and then. But we really work well together. We're really close, and as a byproduct, we're really successful, arguably. But there actually was some really nice research, and this came out of an article in the New York Times I'd also recommend reading about what makes a good team and what's the value of a good team. And there's this experiment in Carnegie Mellon in 2008, and they got 696 people and broke them into smaller groups and had them actually have different tasks together. And what they found was a couple of things, but one was that groups, if they did well at one task, tended to do well at other tasks. And groups that didn't do well on one task were continued to not do well on tasks. And the one thing that made those groups that did well on tasks sort of successful was actually the teammates treated one another better. I'll go into it in a little bit, but actually, so the argument is that even if in the smaller groups where they had maybe one super smart person, the collective IQ of a group of, without that one individual was actually greater than a group with one super smart person. So how do you build this team? So these are a couple of tips and hints for me. The first one is lead by example. This is really obvious. It's very obvious, but for me, it's one that it's actually kind of hard sometimes. So it's like, these silly sayings that your parents tell you when you're younger, treat others how you want to be treated. But that can actually be difficult. Sometimes working with lots of individuals with different personalities, with the different levels of, extroversion, introversion, collaboration or not. There's a lot of different, but it really helps to just kind of keep that kindness, friendliness, openness. And a big one is asking questions. So I was speaking to a much more senior product person yesterday, and he said one of his kind of key things that he looks for and that he aspires for is humility. And for me, that was kind of like, yes, that one really got to this one. The second is creating an environment from openness. So sort of stems from the first, but back to that 2008 research piece. Actually, what they found was that there were, of the successful groups, of those smaller ones with the much higher common IQ, was that all team members not shop, this is a typo, talk roughly the same amount within the group. I thought that was really interesting one, and something that I've actually tried to implement in my team is that making sure that everyone's speaking. And even with those people that may not speak that much or maybe a little bit shy, kind of encouraging them. And also that the teams had a higher average of social sensitivity. So that one's a little bit harder to kind of get out of people, but I think it just means like intuiting how other people are feeling. So the group as a whole kind of collectively understood another team member well enough to intuit, that they may not be that happy with the situation and openly ask them about that. And then the third and the final one is treat your ceremonies like rituals. And this is, the byline is even if they're imperfect. So this was a retro that we did on Friday. Just to give you some more context, we do agile development, so we have daily stand-ups, fortnightly sprint plannings, weekly groomings, and fortnightly retrospectives. And some of these, as you might read, don't look great. So here's the kind of spoiler alert is my company actually made a bunch of redundancies and they're closing its UK office as of last week. So I sort of almost felt bad putting in here like building a team for success, because technically our team is successful, but the business hasn't necessarily been. Yeah, I put this in because I was actually asking one of the engineers that I work with, how to expand upon this. And what he said, which was very interesting, is if you have a retrospective where after 2 weeks of working on stuff, on a sprint, everyone comes out kind of bland, like nothing really bad to say, you're actually in more trouble than if you come out with a bunch of developers actually airing how they feel. So for us, retrospectives especially have become what we've named them therapy hour, because they have become an opportunity for a group of people who work together to create the situation where they can actually talk about the challenges that they're having, celebrate the successes that they're overcoming as well, and also talk about just kind of everyday things that they may not normally be able to talk about, also in a safe environment. I mean, I think one of the most important things about ceremonies is that it's just that team. There's no boss looking in, there's no notes being shared about it afterward with other people. It's just for that team to get together and talk. So that's kind of it. I know it's short and sweet, but to me this, I've worked in places where product teams, I say product teams, but I mean teams of squads, haven't been really hard, and I've worked in ones where it's been really easy like this, and evidence excluded. For me, it's made the biggest difference in the ability for me to do my job and do it well, and to be able to actually deliver really great, valuable things to a company. So, yeah. Questions?
This is just an open forum. It can be on the presentation. It can be just in just relation to your businesses. As Ryan said, literally use this as therapy hour. I see there's a lot of product leaders in this room, so use this therapy hour. Any questions? Sorry, I met Marilyn. She's here.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, like, the product role seems so fundamentally important. At which point do you look to implement that product team? Like, all the processes seem like to be around big companies, you know.
Yeah. So I was consulting for a early stage startup a while ago, and I was their first product role. They already had, and they had about 10 engineers, and I think from that experience, I would say it's probably way harder to plug in product into an already running organization. And so the earlier you could do it, the better. Yeah, probably the earlier the better, because it's like, just in terms of getting other stakeholders and other customers, whoever your customer may be, to start thinking in that product direction. So as opposed to saying, like, this is the thing I need you to do, kind of teaching how to come with, hey, this is the problem that I have, can you help me solve it? Yeah. Does that help answer? Cool. Yeah.
Why do you think some of the teams you've walked into are quite easy and some of them quite difficult? Is that the sort of people you had to work with? They were hired, perhaps?
Yeah, so I think I've definitely worked with really difficult people that have made teams difficult. But I put the responsibility down to myself to make a good team. So I've worked in teams that, you know, worked really well together and some that didn't. And in hindsight, you know, I can't control the other people, but I certainly have been guilty of not being patient enough for that team to kind of form, or for people to essentially kind of, for me to earn their trust, or for them to earn me to earn their trust. Yeah. Yeah, and I think it just comes down to, like, also how kind of me.
Have you had any challenges with, like, locations? So if you have teams where they're based in different locations, and for some these sessions like the retrospectives and stuff like that, you may not have everyone in the same room, so sometimes it's difficult with the communication.
Yeah.
So how do you get around that? Have you had any experiences where you have that
scenario? So a couple of our developers, actually 5 of our developers now are in Amsterdam, 3 are here, and we have 2 in remote, and then the company I was working at before, all were in the Philippines. 2 were in New York, because it was based in New York. So yeah, I've done the remote thing. A couple of things that I found helpful is actually, so sometimes when we run ceremonies, everyone's just at their desk doing it. So then it's everyone dialing in, as opposed to 10 people in one room and 2 people dialing in. The other thing I think that has helped is pair programming. So a lot of the times, you know, some of our developers will get together to program things together or review one another's code, and they'll try to do that with people in other locations. So it's not just siloed into the different, into the same regions.
And who else would you invite to that retrospective? Like, would you invite, so is it mainly the development team, or would you invite all the stakeholders as well to make sure that
just the development team. Just the development team. So this is, like, for us, we actually had a situation we had a situation where we had kind of an interim VP of product who was coming in to try to help us, more from a kind of almost HR perspective with the developers, and make sure that they felt that they had the career opportunities and stuff. And they sat in one or two retrospectives, and it just changed everything completely. It just, you know, removes that. When you've got your boss in the room, you're not going to be as honest, right? It removed that level of kind of safety. That I think is really important to grow a team. Yeah.
So creating openness was one of the points. So what are your tips to create openness?
Yeah, so I think for me it's just about being quite open myself. and I've actually had a couple of developers that I've worked with that I've taken inspiration from that too. So it's really small things, like if what I've noticed that helps is just kind of being a little bit honest about my personal life without getting into too much detail, actually getting into too much detail. But if you're working from home one day and you have the camera on and they see what, the kitchen in your flat looks like, or I think just really basic things like that actually can create that kind of openness in a different way, because and actually just turning on cameras if you have remote calls, which a lot of the times we do, is just people seeing your faces. I think openness is around also asking questions, asking for help too. So I found one of the hardest things to do, but the best things to learn has been when I don't necessarily have the answer to a question, which I don't often when it's about anything technically like implementation, but just about like, hey, here are some options about how we can solve it. What do you guys think? Yeah, it helps.
We've had a few questions before where they've discussed about product teams and creating synergies with the engineering teams. And in terms of your previous experiences, how have you seen that this has worked? And a second part of that question also, with your commercial teams, that what you're building, is it also in line with what they're actually selling as well? Or what they're promising to clients or consumers or things like that? How have you sort of gone around that?
Yeah, so that's like an entirely different presentation. But I actually just implemented a new, we've called it ticketing process around the business, but it's actually way less to do about ticketing. But for me, the product requirement document that's created is the kind of, it is the holy grail of everything that I need to have to communicate with stakeholders. So that for me is what I use to essentially gather all the information, decide what metrics we're going to measure this feature or product around, document some of the initial user stories so that they make sure that everything that we're building toward is in line with what they have. And actually what I end up doing is kind of putting a due date on it or a sign-off date. And then if by a certain, but until that time they have time to give feedback. And if they don't give feedback, I consider that being signed off. Which can be sometimes a little painful when it's, but that actually, it works quite well. And that really works in terms of making sure that the teams are aligned. It's another step to go farther to talk about, expectations of timelines, which I think is a challenge anywhere. And we do our best, and then I add 50% on. It's kind of the best way that I found so far. But yeah, the PRD really is the document that we help to kind of make sure that we're aligned with stakeholders.